"Stop meddling in my life," my daughter screamed, stomping her foot like a rebellious teenager. I just stood there, took a deep breath, and smiled. I grabbed my worn brown leather purse and walked out without a word. 3 weeks later, she got a letter from the bank. When she opened it and saw my signature at the bottom, the pure terror in her eyes said it all. It was exactly 10 minutes to 9 on a Tuesday night in October. We had just finished eating the meatloaf I'd made from scratch after working a 12-hour day cleaning houses across Chicago, and there was my son-in-law Michael, sitting at that dining table I'd bought and paid for, scrolling through his phone with this smug little smirk plastered across his face. All I had done was ask a simple question, a mother's question. "Honey, why aren't you working at Ashley's boutique anymore? You seemed so happy there." But what came next froze my blood and changed everything between us forever. Jessica whipped around to face me, and I saw something in her eyes I'd never seen before. Pure contempt, like I was some stranger who had wandered into her house uninvited. "Mom, you're just an outdated old woman who doesn't get how the world works now. Michael is taking care of all our business stuff, and I don't need to work like a slave in some little shop anymore." Michael didn't even look up from that phone, just nodded his head in agreement, like he was confirming the weather forecast. That casual dismissal hit me harder than Jessica's words. And then my 9-year-old granddaughter Emily came running out of her bedroom, tears streaming down her little face, crying, "Why is Grandma being mean, Mommy? Why are you yelling at Grandma?" My heart shattered into 1,000 pieces right there on that kitchen floor. Here was this precious little girl, confused and scared because her mother was screaming at the woman who had been paying for her private school education for the past 3 years. The woman who bought her Christmas presents and birthday gifts. The woman who babysat her every weekend so Jessica and Michael could have their date nights. I looked at my daughter. This woman I had raised completely on my own after her father walked out when she was barely 2 years old. I thought about all those years cleaning other people's toilets and scrubbing other people's floors all over the south side and northwest side of Chicago, coming home so tired my bones ached just so I could afford to send her to St. Mary's Academy instead of the overcrowded public school in our neighborhood. I remembered selling my wedding ring, the only thing of value I owned, to help pay for her business degree at that small private college downstate. 4 years of working double shifts on weekends, eating peanut butter sandwiches for dinner so she could have spending money for books and clothes and all the things college kids need. And this was how she spoke to me. In front of her husband, who had never worked a real day since I'd known him. In front of her daughter, who was learning that it was acceptable to treat grandmothers with cruelty and disrespect. The silence in that kitchen was so thick you could cut it with a knife. Emily was still crying softly, looking back and forth between her mother and me like she was watching a tennis match. Michael finally looked up from his phone, but only to check the time. I took the deepest breath of my life, smiled at my granddaughter, and said in the calmest voice I could manage, "Okay, honey, I understand." Then I picked up my worn brown leather purse, the same one I've carried for over 10 years because I can't afford to replace it, and I walked out of that house in complete silence. The house where I had scraped together $20,000 for the down payment. The house where I had co-signed the mortgage and made the first 3 years of payments when they couldn't quite manage it yet. The house where I had paid for new carpet in the living room and a new roof just last spring. I drove home to my little 2-bedroom apartment on the northwest side, sat in my car in the parking lot for 20 minutes, and cried like I hadn't cried since Jessica's father left us. But crying wasn't going to fix this. And about 3 weeks later, Jessica got a very official-looking letter from Bank of America. When she opened that envelope and saw my signature at the bottom of the eviction notice, the panic in her eyes told me she finally understood exactly how the world works. Let me tell you what that look was worth, because some lessons are priceless. You won't believe what I discovered about the man my daughter chose to defend over her own mother. If you want to know how a 64-year-old house cleaner took down a lying, cheating manipulator and got her family back, you need to hear the rest of this story. Hit that subscribe button and tell me in the comments, have you ever had to teach a grown child about respect the hard way? Because what I'm about to tell you will shock you. Let me take you back to the beginning so you understand how we got to that awful night in the kitchen. My name is Margaret Johnson. I'm 64 years old, and I've been working as a house cleaner and caregiver for more than 30 years here in Chicago. It's honest work, and I've never been ashamed of it, even when my back screams at the end of a long day. I work a steady schedule that keeps food on the table and a roof over my head. Mondays, Wednesdays, and Fridays, I clean for Mrs. Dorothy Miller in a nice middle-class neighborhood on the Northwest Side. She's 78, lives alone since her husband passed, and pays me $120 each day to keep her 3-bedroom ranch house spotless. Tuesdays and Thursdays, I work downtown in a high-rise condo for Mr. Robert Chen, a retired attorney who needs help maintaining his place and preparing his meals. He pays me $130 per day. Add it all up, and I make about $2,400 a month. Not much by some standards, but I've learned to stretch every penny. Jessica is my only child, my whole world for 31 years before Michael came along. She's 33 now, with those same curly auburn curls I had when I was her age, and her father's hazel eyes. About the only good thing that man ever gave us before he disappeared when she was just 2 years old. I raised her completely on my own in a small apartment on Chicago's South Side, working 2 and sometimes 3 cleaning jobs to make sure she had everything she needed. When Jessica was little, she used to wait for me after school at Mrs. Garcia's house next door, doing her homework at the kitchen table while I finished my evening jobs. She was always so smart, getting straight A's without me even having to push her. By the time she graduated high school, I had saved enough to send her to St. Mary's Academy, a private Catholic school where she could get the education I never had. Then came college. Jessica got accepted to Morrison College, a small private school about 3 hours south of Chicago. The tuition was $32,000 a year, more money than I made in 15 months. But I wasn't going to let my brilliant daughter miss her chance at a real education and a better life than mine. I worked 7 days a week for 4 years. I sold my wedding ring to a pawn shop on Western Avenue for $800 to help with her freshman year textbooks. I ate peanut butter sandwiches and canned soup for dinner most nights, so I could send her $50 a week for spending money. When the heating bill got too high in winter, I just wore extra sweaters and kept the thermostat at 62 degrees. It was all worth it when Jessica graduated with her business degree in 2014. She looked so beautiful in that cap and gown, and when she hugged me and said, "Mom, I couldn't have done this without you," I felt like the richest woman in the world. After college, Jessica got a job at Ashley's boutique in Lincoln Park. Ashley Rodriguez had been Jessica's college roommate, and she offered Jessica a position as assistant manager at her upscale women's clothing store. Jessica loved that job. She had always had great taste in fashion, and she was making decent money, about $3,000 a month plus commission. That's when Michael entered our lives. Jessica met Michael Morrison at a graduation party in the spring of 2018. He was 31 then, tall and lean, with perfectly styled dark hair and expensive cologne that probably cost more than I spent on groceries in a month. He drove a silver BMW that always looked freshly washed, wore designer shirts, and had this confident way of speaking that made you feel like he knew secrets about success that the rest of us were missing. "Mrs. Johnson," he said, the first time Jessica brought him to meet me, flashing that $1,000,000 smile. I can see where Jessica gets her beauty and her strength. She's told me so much about what an amazing mother you are, how you sacrificed everything to give her opportunities. That's the kind of woman who deserves respect. I have to admit, I was charmed. After years of watching Jessica date boys who didn't seem to appreciate what a special young woman she was, here was a man who seemed to understand her value. He brought me flowers when he came to dinner, real roses, not gas station carnations. He asked thoughtful questions about my work and seemed genuinely interested in my answers. He even offered to help with heavy lifting when I mentioned Mrs. Miller needed some furniture moved. "Jessica is so lucky to have a mother like you," he would say, making eye contact and speaking with such sincerity. "Too many kids today don't appreciate what their parents have done for them. But Jessica knows. She talks about you constantly, about how hard you worked to give her everything." When they got engaged after dating for 8 months, I cried tears of joy. Finally, my daughter had found a man who valued family, who understood the importance of respect and gratitude. Michael told us he was an entrepreneur, working in digital marketing consulting from home. He showed us screenshots of earnings from various online projects, numbers like $4,000, $6,000, even $8,000 in a single month. The beauty of modern business, Mrs. Johnson, he explained, is that you can work from anywhere. I'm building multiple income streams through online platforms. It takes time to establish, but once the systems are in place, the money flows in automatically. They had a small wedding at St. Catherine's Church in September 2019. Nothing fancy. About 40 guests, a simple reception at a nearby restaurant. I paid for Jessica's dress, a beautiful ivory gown that cost $1,100, and I was proud to do it. Michael's family came from Indianapolis. His parents seemed nice enough, though they didn't stay long after the ceremony. Little Emily was born 10 months later, in July 2020, right in the middle of all that pandemic craziness. She was the most perfect baby I'd ever seen, with Jessica's curls but lighter, almost blonde, and these huge blue eyes that seemed to take in everything around her. When I held my granddaughter for the first time in that hospital room, I knew I would do anything to protect this little angel. But that's when things started to change. About 6 months after Emily was born, Jessica came to me with the first request. Mom, I know this is awkward, but we're in a tight spot this month. Michael's business took a hit during the pandemic. A lot of his clients had to cut back on marketing expenses. Could you maybe help us with the rent, just until things pick up again? The amount was $950, nearly half my monthly income. But this was my daughter, my granddaughter. Family helps family, right? I dipped into the small emergency fund I'd been building and handed over the money. It's just temporary, Mom, Jessica assured me, looking embarrassed but grateful. Michael says things should turn around by spring. His new project is really promising. Spring came and went, then summer. The requests kept coming, month after month. $950 for rent, $350 for groceries, $400 for Emily's daycare, $200 for car payments and gas. Always with the same explanation. Michael's business was just about to take off, just one more month, just until this big deal came through. By the fall of 2021, I was handing over nearly $1,800 a month to support my daughter's family. I was working extra jobs on weekends, cleaning offices in the loop for cash under the table, just to keep up with my own bills. My savings account was empty. I was 59 years old with nothing put away for retirement, supporting a grown man who claimed to be an entrepreneur but never seemed to have any actual income. And that's when the first red flag appeared, though I didn't recognize it at the time. Jessica quit her job at Ashley's boutique. Mom, Michael says a married woman shouldn't have to work outside the home, she explained when she called to tell me. He wants to focus on being a mother to Emily and supporting his business from home. He's got some really big opportunities coming up, and he needs me to help manage the administrative side. I should have asked more questions. I should have demanded to see proof of these mysterious business opportunities. But I didn't want to seem like I was interfering in their marriage. I didn't want to be one of those mothers-in-law who caused problems. What I didn't know yet was that Michael had been planning this all along. And what happened next would make that first year of requests look like pocket change. If you think $950 a month was bad, wait until you hear what I discovered about where my money was really going. Stay with me, because the worst is yet to come. After Jessica quit her job at Ashley's boutique, the financial requests didn't just continue, they escalated dramatically. What had started as temporary help with $950 for rent became a monthly obligation that consumed nearly every penny I earned. By January 2022, here's what I was paying every single month: $950 for their rent on a 3-bedroom house in Arlington Heights that I had never even been consulted about when they moved there. $350 for groceries, because apparently Michael had very specific tastes and couldn't eat cheap food. $400 for Emily's private preschool at Little Angels Academy. $200 for car payments and gas for Michael's BMW. $150 for utilities. Another $200 for what Jessica called miscellaneous family expenses. Things like Emily's clothes, household supplies, and emergency funds. Do the math. That's $2,250 every month. I was making $2,400. I had exactly $150 left for my own rent, my own food, my own car payment, my own utilities. I was slowly drowning, working myself into the ground to support a man who spent his days playing video games while my daughter waited on him hand and foot. But I didn't know about the video games yet. That discovery came by accident on a Thursday afternoon in February. I had decided to surprise Jessica and Emily with one of my homemade chocolate cakes, the same recipe I'd been making for Jessica's birthday every year since she was 5. I thought maybe a surprise visit with something sweet would help us reconnect. We'd been drifting apart ever since she quit her job, and our phone conversations had become stilted and awkward, always ending with her asking if I could help out with just one more thing this month. When I pulled up to their house on Maple Street, the house with the perfectly manicured lawn and the expensive SUV in the driveway that I didn't even know they had, I heard loud male laughter coming from inside. Not just Michael's laugh, but multiple voices, whooping and cheering like they were watching a football game. I walked around to the side of the house where I knew the living room window was and peered through the gap in the curtains. What I saw made my blood boil. Michael was sprawled on the leather sectional sofa, furniture I had never seen before and certainly hadn't paid for, with a video game controller in his hands and his feet up on the coffee table. 2 other men about his age were sitting on either side of him, also holding controllers, and all 3 of them were staring at a massive flat-screen television that had to be at least 65 inches. There were empty beer bottles scattered across the coffee table, along with the remains of what looked like expensive takeout from some Asian restaurant. Containers and containers of food that probably cost more than I spent on groceries in a week. And where was Jessica during this business meeting? In the kitchen, visible through the open doorway, ironing a basket full of men's shirts while little Emily sat at the kitchen table coloring quietly, ignored by everyone. I stood there watching for at least 10 minutes, waiting to see some sign of this business Michael was supposed to be conducting. All I saw was 3 grown men playing video games, drinking beer, and eating expensive food on a Thursday afternoon while my daughter did their laundry. When I rang the doorbell, the scrambling that followed was almost comical. I heard frantic whispers, the television volume suddenly dropping, and footsteps running around inside. By the time Jessica opened the door, Michael's friends had disappeared, probably out the back door, and Michael himself was sitting at the kitchen table with a laptop open, trying to look busy. "Mom, what a surprise," Jessica said, but her smile looked forced, and she kept glancing back toward the kitchen nervously. "I wasn't expecting you." "I brought Emily a cake," I said, stepping inside before Jessica could make an excuse about it being a bad time. The smell of beer and takeout food was still hanging in the air, and I could see Michael quickly closing browser windows on his laptop. "What were you and Michael working on? Sounded like you were having a celebration in here." "Oh, that was just Michael having a conference call with some business associates," Jessica said quickly. "You know how these entrepreneur types are. They like to keep things casual and upbeat. Builds better relationships with clients." I nodded and smiled, but inside I was screaming. Conference call? With beer and video games? That night, I went home and did something I'd never done before in my 62 years. I looked up Michael Morrison on social media. What I found there was the second shock that started to open my eyes to who this man really was. Michael's profiles painted the picture of a man living a lifestyle that was completely at odds with someone whose business was supposedly struggling. Photos of expensive dinners at high-end Chicago restaurants, pictures of him and Jessica at Cubs games in what looked like premium seats behind home plate, vacation photos from a weekend trip to Wisconsin Dells, staying at what appeared to be a luxury resort, Jessica wearing jewelry I'd never seen her wear before, a diamond tennis bracelet, pearl earrings, a gold necklace that looked like it cost more than my monthly salary. And the dates on these photos? They were all recent. All posted during the same months when Jessica was calling me in tears, begging for help with rent money because Michael's business was having a rough patch. But what really caught my attention was a photo posted just 3 days earlier. Michael and another woman, a young blonde who couldn't have been more than 25, at some trendy rooftop bar in downtown Chicago. She was leaning into him. His arm was around her waist, and the caption read, "Great meeting with my business partner Sarah. Excited about our new ventures together." Business partner? I'd been married for 15 years before Jessica's father left, and I knew what a business meeting looked like when a man's hand was resting that low on his partner's back. I screenshot that photo and several others, though I wasn't sure what I was going to do with them yet. But something in my gut told me I needed to start keeping track of things. The third shock came 2 weeks later, and this one nearly knocked me off my feet. I had gone to pay Jessica and Michael's electric bill, another monthly obligation that had somehow become my responsibility, at the Commonwealth Edison office on North Michigan Avenue. When I handed over the account number Jessica had given me, the customer service representative looked confused. "Ma'am, this account isn't under the name Johnson," she said, squinting at her computer screen. "It's listed under Morrison, but the first name isn't Michael. It's Matthew Morrison." Matthew Morrison, not Michael Morrison. When I asked Jessica about it later that day, she stumbled over her explanation like a guilty teenager caught in a lie. "Oh, Michael had to change his name for business reasons," she said, not meeting my eyes. "You know how it is with online businesses. Sometimes you need different names for different projects. It's all perfectly legal, Mom. Don't worry about it." Don't worry about it? My son-in-law was using a different name on official documents, and I wasn't supposed to worry about it? That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about that photo with the young blonde, about the expensive lifestyle I was apparently funding, about the man playing video games while my daughter ironed his shirts, and now a fake name. I made a decision that would change everything. The next morning, I called Mrs. Miller and asked if I could take a personal day. Then I drove to the Chicago Public Library and spent 4 hours learning how to do background checks online. What I found when I searched for both Michael Morrison and Matthew Morrison made me physically sick. The man my daughter had married, the man I'd been supporting for over 2 years, had a bankruptcy filed in Indiana under the name Matthew Morrison just 6 months before he met Jessica. Not only that, but he had outstanding warrants for unpaid child support in Indianapolis. Apparently, he had an 8-year-old son with a woman named Jennifer Kim who hadn't received a penny from him in over 3 years. But what I found next was so devastating that I had to run to the library bathroom and splash cold water on my face to keep from fainting. Matthew Morrison was married, not to Jessica, to a woman named Sandra Morrison in Indianapolis, Indiana. They had been married since 2015, and according to the public records I could access, that marriage had never been dissolved. Jessica wasn't Michael's wife. She was his girlfriend, his side piece, the other woman. And I had been funding his double life for 2 years. When I got home that evening, I sat in my car in the parking lot of my apartment building for an hour, trying to figure out what to do with this information. Do I tell Jessica immediately? Do I gather more evidence first? Do I confront Michael directly? While I was sitting there, my phone rang. It was Jessica. "Mom, I'm so sorry to ask again, but we're in a real emergency situation," she said, and I could hear tears in her voice. "Emily had an accident at school and had to go to the emergency room. She's fine. She just needed a few stitches on her chin, but the insurance didn't cover everything, and we owe the hospital $850. They want payment by tomorrow, or they're sending it to collections. Could you please help us out? I promise we'll pay you back as soon as Michael's new contract comes through. $850. Another emergency. Another crisis that somehow became my financial responsibility. "Of course, honey," I heard myself saying. "I'll transfer the money tonight." But after I hung up, I did something different. I called Mercy Hospital directly and asked to speak with the billing department. I gave them Emily's name and asked about recent emergency room visits. "I'm sorry, ma'am," the billing representative told me after checking her system. "We don't show any recent visits for an Emily Morrison." "Are you sure about the name? Or the date?" "No emergency room visit. No stitches. No medical bills. $850 for nothing." Another lie. Another manipulation designed to squeeze more money out of the woman who was apparently keeping Michael's entire lifestyle afloat. That's when I knew I had to act, but I wasn't ready to confront them yet, because I suspected there was more to discover. And I was right. The next week, Mrs. Miller asked me to stay late to help her organize some old photo albums. We were sitting in her living room, going through pictures from her late husband's career as a real estate agent, when she suddenly stopped and pointed to a photograph. "Margaret, isn't that your son-in-law?" she asked, holding up a picture of her and Mr. Miller at some charity event. I looked at the photo and felt the world tilt sideways. There was Michael, or Matthew, or whoever he really was, in a tuxedo, with his arm around an elegant woman in a red evening gown. An older woman, probably in her 50s, with perfectly styled silver hair and expensive jewelry. "When was this taken?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. "Oh, this was last spring at the Children's Hospital fundraiser at the Drake Hotel. Ted and I went every year. Such a lovely event, and so many successful young couples supporting a good cause." Mrs. Miller squinted at the photo again. "What was his date's name? Something with a C? Catherine? Carol? She said she was in real estate too. Very successful. Lovely woman, though she seemed quite a bit older than him. Last spring, when Jessica was home with Emily, telling me Michael was working 18-hour days trying to build his business." "Mrs. Miller," I said carefully, "are you absolutely sure this was last spring, around April or May?" "Oh yes, dear. It was right after Easter because I remember wearing my new spring dress. Why do you ask? Is everything all right?" Everything was not all right. Everything was falling apart. And I was starting to realize that the man my daughter thought she was married to was living a life that was far more complicated and far more dangerous than any of us had imagined. But what I discovered next would make everything else look like child's play. Because Mrs. Miller wasn't finished with her photo albums, and the picture she showed me 20 minutes later would finally reveal the full scope of Michael's deception. "Oh, here's another one of your son-in-law," she said, flipping to the next page. "This one's from that lovely 4th of July party the Hendersons threw. Such a fun evening." The photo showed Michael at a backyard barbecue, laughing and holding a beer. But he wasn't alone, and he wasn't with the older woman from the charity event. He was with a young blonde woman, the same young blonde from his social media photos, and she was very obviously pregnant. Very, very pregnant. And she was wearing a wedding ring. If you thought Michael's lies were bad so far, what I found out about this pregnant woman and where my money was really going will make your blood boil. The truth was so much worse than anything I could have imagined. Stay with me, because the confrontation that's coming will shock you. Staring at that photo of Michael with the pregnant blonde woman at the 4th of July party, I felt something shift inside me. It wasn't just anger anymore. It was a cold, calculating determination. This man had been playing my daughter, playing me, and apparently playing multiple other women at the same time. And I was going to find out exactly how deep this deception went. "Mrs. Miller," I said, trying to keep my voice steady, "do you remember anything else about this woman? Did you talk to her at the party?" Mrs. Miller put on her reading glasses and studied the photo more carefully. "Oh yes, such a sweet young thing. She was so excited about the baby. Kept talking about how this was her first child and how supportive her husband was being about her morning sickness. I remember thinking it was lovely to see such a devoted young couple. Her husband. The pregnant woman thought Michael was her husband. Did she mention her name or where they lived? I believe her name was Sarah something, and she mentioned they had just bought a house in Naperville. She was so proud of it, kept showing everyone pictures on her phone of the nursery they were decorating. Sarah. The same Sarah from Michael's social media posts, the one he'd called his business partner. But Mrs. Miller was describing her as his pregnant wife who lived in a house in Naperville. I spent the rest of that evening thinking about what I'd learned, and by morning I'd made a decision that would have seemed impossible to me just a week earlier. I was going to hire a private investigator. I knew it would cost money I didn't have, but I couldn't confront Jessica with scattered pieces of information that she could explain away. I needed the whole truth, documented and undeniable. I needed evidence that would save my daughter from this man before he destroyed her life completely. The next morning, I called in sick to both my Thursday jobs and drove to downtown Chicago. I'd found the name of a private investigation firm online, Midwest Investigations, run by a former Chicago police detective named Thomas Rivera. His office was in a modest building on West Jackson. Nothing fancy, but his website said he specialized in matrimonial investigations and background checks. Thomas Rivera turned out to be a kind, soft-spoken man in his 50s who listened to my story without judgment and quoted me a price that made my heart sink. $1,250 for a comprehensive investigation that would include background checks, surveillance, and documentation of Michael's activities across multiple locations. $1,250, more than half my monthly income. But I thought about that photo of the pregnant woman, about Jessica ironing shirts while Michael played video games, about little Emily growing up thinking this was what marriage looked like. I thought about the fake emergency room bill and the lies about business meetings and the expensive lifestyle I was funding. I emptied my savings account, every penny I had left, which was exactly $1,342, and hired Thomas Rivera to find out who Michael Morrison really was. What he discovered over the next 10 days was worse than anything I could have imagined. Thomas called me on a Tuesday evening, asking if I could come to his office the following day to review his findings. "Mrs. Johnson," he said, his voice unusually serious, "I think it's important that we go through this information together. Some of it is quite disturbing." When I sat down in his office the next afternoon, Thomas placed a thick manila folder on the desk between us. "I'm going to walk you through this systematically," he said, "because it's a lot to process. Let's start with the basic identity information." He opened the folder and pulled out several official documents. "The man your daughter knows as Michael Morrison is actually Matthew Richard Morrison, age 37. He was born in Gary, Indiana, and has lived in Indiana for most of his adult life. He has never legally changed his name to Michael. He simply uses it as an alias. 37. Not 36 like he'd told us, and not legally Michael. Matthew Morrison has been married twice," Thomas continued. "His first marriage was to Jennifer Kim in 2010. They had a son, Marcus, who is now 13 years old. Morrison owes $47,000 in unpaid child support and has active warrants in Indiana for contempt of court related to those payments. $47,000 in unpaid child support. A 13-year-old son he'd abandoned. His second marriage," Thomas said, pulling out another set of documents, "is to Sandra Morrison, née Williams. They were married in Indianapolis in 2015, and that marriage has never been dissolved. Sandra Morrison is 34 years old and works as a nurse at Indianapolis General Hospital. According to my surveillance, she believes her husband works in Chicago during the week and comes home on weekends." I stared at the marriage certificate, at Sandra Morrison's signature next to the man I knew as Michael. "So Jessica isn't married to him at all?" "Correct. Your daughter is in what's legally called a common law relationship, though she clearly believes she's married. The wedding ceremony she participated in was not legally valid because Morrison was already married to someone else." The room was spinning. Jessica's marriage was fake, completely fake. "But it gets worse," Thomas said gently. He pulled out a series of photographs. "This is Sarah Chen, age 26, a real estate agent from Naperville. She's currently 7 months pregnant, and she also believes she's married to Matthew Morrison." The photos showed Sarah at what was clearly a baby shower, surrounded by friends and family, opening gifts and laughing. In several photos, she was showing off a wedding ring and talking animatedly to other women. Morrison convinced Sarah that his work requires him to travel extensively, so he's only in Naperville a few days each month. She thinks he's building a consulting business that will allow them to travel the world together after the baby is born. 3 women, 3 separate lives, 3 different lies. How is he maintaining all of this? I asked, though I already suspected I knew the answer. Thomas pulled out financial records that made my stomach clench. "Morrison has no legitimate income that I can trace. However, he appears to be receiving regular financial support from multiple sources. Sarah Chen has been providing approximately $2,000 per month since they've been together. She believes she's helping fund their joint business venture. Sandra Morrison contributes about $1,500 monthly, thinking she's supporting his Chicago work expenses. And then there was me, the third source of income. The woman cleaning houses to fund a lifestyle that was supporting 3 different relationships across 2 states. Mrs. Johnson, based on the financial records I was able to access, Morrison is bringing in approximately $6,000 per month from the 3 of you combined. He's using this money to maintain separate households, purchase expensive items to support his various personas, and fund what appears to be a fairly lavish personal lifestyle. $6,000 a month. And Jessica and I were living in poverty, believing we were helping a struggling entrepreneur get his business off the ground. There's one more thing, Thomas said, pulling out the final set of documents. Morrison has been arrested twice in Indiana, once for passing bad checks and once for identity theft. Both charges were eventually dropped due to technicalities, but the pattern of behavior is clear. I sat in that office for over an hour, going through every document, every photograph, every piece of evidence Thomas had gathered. By the time I left, I understood exactly what kind of man had inserted himself into my daughter's life, and I knew exactly what I had to do. But first, I needed to see it with my own eyes. That Friday, I called in sick to my cleaning job with Mrs. Miller and drove to Naperville. I'd gotten Sarah Chen's address from the investigation report, and I needed to see this other life that my money was helping to fund. The house in Naperville was beautiful, a 2-story colonial in a new development with a perfectly manicured lawn and a luxury SUV in the driveway. Exactly the kind of house Jessica had dreamed of living in someday, the kind of life she thought Michael was working toward for their family. Except he was already living that life, with someone else, using money from 3 different women to fund it. I sat in my car across the street for 2 hours, and what I saw during that time filled in the final pieces of the puzzle. Michael's silver BMW was parked in the driveway. Through the large front window, I could see him and Sarah moving around what appeared to be a nursery, assembling baby furniture and hanging decorations. Sarah was very obviously pregnant now, probably 8 months along, and Michael was playing the role of devoted, expectant father. At one point, they came outside together, and I watched Michael help Sarah into the SUV with the kind of tender care he had never shown Jessica, even when she was pregnant with Emily. He opened her car door, adjusted her seatbelt, kissed her forehead before closing the door and walking around to the driver's side. They drove away together, probably heading to a doctor's appointment or baby store, living the life of an excited couple preparing for their first child, the life that should have been Jessica's, if any of it had been real. That evening, I did something I never thought I'd have the courage to do. I called Sandra Morrison in Indianapolis. I'd gotten her phone number from the investigation report, and after sitting in my car outside that beautiful house in Naperville, watching Michael play house with his pregnant girlfriend while my daughter and granddaughter struggled in Chicago, I knew Sandra deserved to know what kind of man she was married to. When Sandra answered the phone, her voice was warm and friendly. "Hello? Hi, Sandra. My name is Margaret Johnson, and I'm calling about your husband, Matthew Morrison." There was a pause. "I'm sorry. I think you have the wrong number. My husband's name is Michael, not Matthew." "Sandra, I need to tell you some things that are going to be very difficult to hear, but I think you deserve to know the truth about the man you're married to." What followed was one of the most painful conversations I've ever had in my life. I told Sandra everything, about Jessica, about Emily, about the fake marriage ceremony, about the money I'd been sending, about the pregnancy in Naperville. At first, Sandra didn't believe me. She insisted there had to be some mistake, that her husband traveled for work, but would never deceive her like that. But when I started describing specific details about Michael's appearance, his BMW, his stories about digital marketing consulting, Sandra's voice changed. By the time I finished talking, she was crying. "He told me he was building a consulting business in Chicago," she whispered. "He said it required him to be there Monday through Thursday every week, but that it was going to make us enough money to buy our dream house and start a family. I've been sending him $1,500 every month to help with business expenses. Sandra, I'm so sorry, but there's more you need to know. There's a third woman, and she's pregnant with what she thinks is his baby." The silence on the other end of the phone lasted so long, I thought she'd hung up. Finally, Sandra spoke again, and her voice was steady and determined. "Mrs. Johnson, I'm going to need some time to process this, but I want you to know that I believe you, and I want to help you stop him. This man has destroyed enough lives." We talked for another hour, sharing information, comparing stories, filling in the gaps of each other's experiences. By the time we hung up, we had a plan. Sandra was going to gather evidence from her end, financial records, phone bills, anything that could prove Michael's deception. I was going to do the same from Chicago, and together we were going to make sure that Michael Morrison, or Matthew Morrison, or whoever he really was, faced the consequences of his actions. But first, I had to tell Jessica everything, and I knew that conversation was going to be the most difficult thing I'd ever had to do as a mother. The next morning, I gathered all my courage and called Jessica. I asked her to meet me for lunch on Saturday, just the two of us. "I need to talk to you about something extremely important," I told her, choosing my words carefully. "And I need you to promise me you'll listen with an open mind." "Mom, If this is about money again, I already told you we're trying to be more independent. Jessica started, her voice already getting defensive. It's not about money, sweetheart. It's about your safety and Emily's future. Please, just meet me for lunch, 1 hour of your time, and then you can decide what you want to do with what I have to tell you. Something in my tone must have convinced her, because she agreed to meet me at Denny's on North Avenue at noon on Saturday. It was a quiet place where we could talk without interruption, and I figured the familiar setting might make the conversation easier. I spent the entire night before that lunch organizing all the documents Thomas had given me, practicing what I was going to say, trying to figure out how to tell your own daughter that her entire life is built on lies without destroying her completely in the process. I rehearsed different approaches. Should I start with the fake name? The other marriages? The pregnant girlfriend? How do you ease someone into discovering that the person they love doesn't exist? But as it turned out, I never got the chance to show Jessica those documents. Because when I arrived at Denny's on Saturday afternoon at 5 minutes to noon, Jessica wasn't alone. Michael was with her, and the look on his face told me he knew exactly why I'd called this meeting. They were sitting in a booth in the back corner, and Jessica's body language told me everything I needed to know. Her shoulders were tense, her hands were folded tightly in her lap, and she wouldn't make eye contact with me. This wasn't going to be the conversation I'd planned. "Mom," Jessica said before I even sat down, her voice cold and clearly rehearsed. "Michael and I have been talking, and we think it's time for us to establish some healthy boundaries in our relationship. You've been incredibly generous with your help over the years, and we appreciate everything you've done. But we're adults, and we need to start managing our own finances from now on." Michael smiled that charming smile and nodded in agreement, but there was something different about him today, something calculating and dangerous behind his eyes. "Mrs. Johnson, Jessica and I have made the decision to stand on our own 2 feet. We don't want to be dependent on anyone else anymore. It's time for us to take full responsibility for our own lives and our own family." They had rehearsed this speech. They had planned this intervention. And somehow, Michael had figured out that I was getting suspicious and had convinced Jessica to cut me off before I could tell her the truth. The manila folder in my purse felt like it weighed 100 pounds. All that evidence, all that proof of who Michael really was, and they weren't going to let me share any of it. But what happened next was something none of us could have planned for. Just as Michael was finishing his speech about independence and taking responsibility, his phone started ringing. The sound cut through the restaurant noise, and all 3 of us looked down at the device sitting on the table. The name flashing on the screen was visible to everyone. Sarah, baby emergency. The look of confusion that crossed Jessica's face in that moment told me everything I needed to know. She had no idea who Sarah was. She had never heard that name before. And she was about to find out exactly what kind of man she'd chosen to defend over her own mother. Michael grabbed for his phone quickly, trying to silence it, but it was too late. Jessica had seen the name, and she was staring at him with a question in her eyes that he couldn't answer without destroying everything he'd built. "Who's Sarah?" Jessica asked quietly, her voice barely above a whisper. Michael's face went pale, but he tried to recover. It's just a business contact," he stammered. But for the first time since I'd known him, that smooth confidence was cracking. "She's having some kind of emergency with a project we're working on." The phone stopped ringing, then immediately started again. Same name. Sarah, baby emergency. "Michael," Jessica said, and her voice was getting dangerous now. "Why is a business contact calling you about a baby emergency? And why is her name in your phone as if you know her personally?" That's when I reached into my purse and pulled out the manila folder Thomas had given me. I placed it on the table between us, right next to Michael's still ringing phone, and looked my daughter straight in the eye. "Jessica, sweetheart, I know you're angry with me right now, and I know you think I'm interfering in your life. But before you cut me out completely, I need you to look at what's in this folder, because the man sitting next to you isn't who you think he is." Michael stood up abruptly, his chair scraping loudly against the floor. "I don't have to listen to this nonsense. Jessica, we're leaving, now." But Jessica didn't move. She was staring at the folder, then at Michael's phone, which had started ringing for the 3rd time. Something in her expression told me that maybe, finally, she was starting to see through the lies. "Sit down, Michael," Jessica said quietly. but there was steel in her voice now. I want to hear what my mother has to say. And that's when I opened the folder and began to tell my daughter the truth about the man she thought she'd married. The truth about his real name, his real wife, his pregnant girlfriend, and the elaborate scheme he'd been running using our money. The truth that would change everything. The truth that would finally set us free. What happened in the next 30 minutes would destroy Michael's carefully constructed house of lies and bring my daughter back to me. But it would also break her heart in ways I wasn't sure either of us would ever fully recover from. Tell me in the comments, have you ever had to be the one to deliver devastating news to someone you love? Because what came next tested every ounce of strength I had as a mother. Michael was still standing, his face flushed with panic, when I opened that manila folder and spread the first document across the table. It was his real marriage certificate, the one that showed Matthew Richard Morrison married to Sandra Williams in Indianapolis, Indiana on June 15, 2015. Jessica stared at the document for a long moment, her face going completely white. What is this, Mom? That's your husband's real marriage certificate, honey, to a woman named Sandra Morrison, who lives in Indianapolis. A woman who thinks she's married to a man named Michael, who travels to Chicago for work every week. Michael lunged forward, trying to grab the papers. This is insane. Jessica, don't listen to her. Your mother has obviously lost her mind and is making up stories to try to control our lives. But Jessica held up her hand, stopping him. Her voice was deadly calm. Sit down, Michael. Or Matthew. Or whoever you are. I pulled out the next document. The background check showing his real age, his arrest records, his outstanding child support warrants. He's 37, not 36. He owes $47,000 in unpaid child support to a woman named Jennifer Kim for a 13-year-old son named Marcus. Jessica's hands were shaking as she picked up each paper. The birth certificate showing his real name. The bankruptcy filing from 6 months before he met her. The record of his previous arrests. Jessica, please, Michael said, his voice getting desperate. I can explain all of this. Your mother hired someone to fabricate these documents. She's trying to break us up because she can't stand to see you happy. That's when I pulled out the photographs. The first one showed Michael with Sarah Chen at that charity fundraiser, his arm around her waist, both of them dressed in formal wear and smiling at the camera like a married couple. The second showed them at the 4th of July party, Sarah visibly pregnant, wearing a wedding ring, Michael's hand resting protectively on her belly. This is Sarah Chen, I said quietly. She's 26 years old, she lives in Naperville, and she's 8 months pregnant with what she believes is her husband Michael's baby. She's been sending him $2,000 a month to support what she thinks is their joint business. Jessica looked at the photos, then at Michael's phone, which had finally stopped ringing. When she spoke, her voice was barely a whisper. Is this true? Michael was sweating now, his smooth facade completely gone. Jessica, you have to understand this is all a misunderstanding. I can explain everything if you just give me a chance. But Jessica wasn't looking at him anymore. She was staring at me with tears in her eyes. Mom, how long have you known about this? I started getting suspicious a few weeks ago. I hired a private investigator 10 days ago. I found out the whole truth 3 days ago. I reached across the table and took her hand. Sweetheart, I'm so sorry. I know how much this hurts. That's when Michael made his final desperate play. Jessica, think about what you're doing. Your mother has always been jealous of our relationship. She's never approved of me, and now she's trying to destroy our marriage with fake documents and lies. Don't let her manipulation tear apart our family. For a moment, I thought it might work. Jessica looked confused, torn between the evidence in front of her and 3 years of Michael's psychological manipulation. But then his phone started ringing again. This time, the name on the screen was Sandra, call back urgent. Jessica stared at the phone, then at Michael, then at me. Answer it, she said quietly. What? Michael asked. Answer the phone, Michael. Answer it right now, or I'm walking out of here and taking Emily with me. Michael's face went gray. Jessica, I can't. It's not what you think. Answer it, Jessica repeated, her voice getting stronger. If these documents are fake, if my mother is lying, then prove it. Answer your phone and let me talk to this Sandra person. The phone kept ringing. Michael made no move to answer it. That's when Jessica reached across the table and answered it herself. "Hello?" she said, putting the phone on speaker. "Michael? Thank God you called back. I've been trying to reach you all morning. I found something in your laptop bag that I need to ask you about. There are bank statements here showing regular deposits to something called a Chase account in Chicago. Large deposits, Michael. Where is this money coming from? And why haven't you told me about this account?" Jessica's face went completely still. She looked at Michael, who was now openly panicking. "Sandra? This is Jessica. I think we need to talk." There was silence on the other end of the phone. Finally, Sandra's voice came through, confused and shaky. "I'm sorry, who is this? Why do you have my husband's phone?" "Your husband?" Jessica's voice was getting dangerously quiet. "Sandra, I think there are some things you need to know about the man you're married to." What followed was the most devastating conversation I've ever witnessed. Jessica, with a calm that scared me, told Sandra everything. About their wedding in Chicago, about Emily, about the house and the money, and the 3 years they'd spent building what Jessica thought was their life together. Sandra, in turn, told Jessica about their marriage in Indianapolis, about the house they owned together, about the plans they'd made for their future, about the money she'd been sending to support his business in Chicago. And then, just as both women were beginning to understand the scope of Michael's deception, Sarah Chen called back. This time, Jessica answered immediately and put the call on speaker. "Michael?" Sarah's voice was frantic. "I'm at the hospital. Something's wrong with the baby. I need you here right now. The doctors are saying I might need an emergency C-section, and I can't do this alone. Please, Michael, I need my husband." The silence that followed was deafening. Michael had gone completely pale and was staring at the phone like it was a bomb about to explode. "Sarah," Jessica said gently, "this is Jessica. I'm someone who knows Michael. Are you okay? Are you and the baby safe?" Who is this?" Sarah asked, her voice confused and scared. "Why are you answering Michael's phone? Where is my husband?" And that's when Jessica, my strong, incredible daughter, did something that made me proud of her in a way I'd never been proud before. Instead of hanging up, instead of running away, instead of falling apart, she took control. "Sarah, listen to me carefully. I need you to focus on you and your baby right now. Are you at the hospital? Do you have someone with you?" I'm at Northwestern Memorial in Chicago. My sister is driving here, but she won't be here for an hour. I'm so scared, and I don't understand where Michael is or why you're answering his phone. Sarah, I'm going to come to the hospital. I'm going to explain everything when I get there. But right now, I need you to know that you're not alone, and we're going to figure this out together. Michael finally found his voice. "Jessica, you can't be serious. You're not actually going to—" "Shut up," Jessica said without even looking at him. "Just shut up and don't say another word." She turned back to the phone. "Sarah, I'm on my way. What floor are you on?" After Jessica got the information and hung up, she looked at me with tears in her eyes, but with a strength I hadn't seen in years. "Mom, will you come with me? I think Sarah is going to need both of us." I nodded, unable to speak through my own tears. Michael made one last attempt at control. "Jessica, if you walk away from me now, if you choose to believe these lies over your own husband, then we're done. Emily and I are done. You'll never see me again." Jessica stood up slowly, gathering the documents from the table. She looked at Michael for a long moment, and when she spoke, her voice was calm and clear. "Michael, or Matthew, or whoever you really are, you're right about one thing. We are done. But Emily and I are going to be just fine without you." She turned to me. "Mom, I owe you the biggest apology of my life, and I know I have a lot to make up for. But right now, there's a scared young woman at the hospital who needs our help, and I think we need to go." As we walked out of that restaurant, leaving Michael sitting alone at the table with his lies finally exposed, I felt something I hadn't felt in 3 years. I felt like I had my daughter back. The drive to Northwestern Memorial Hospital was quiet. Jessica cried softly while I drove, and I let her process everything that had just happened. Finally, she spoke. "Mom, how did you know? How did you figure it out when I couldn't see it?" "Sometimes when you're too close to something, it's harder to see clearly," I told her. "And Michael was very good at what he did. He made you feel like questioning him was wrong, like doubting him made you a bad wife." "I was so cruel to you," Jessica whispered. "That night in the kitchen, the things I said, you were protecting what you thought was your family. I understand that, sweetheart. And none of that matters now." At the hospital, we found Sarah Chen in the maternity ward, scared and alone and in early labor. When Jessica introduced herself and began to explain the situation, I watched my daughter transform into someone I'd never seen before. She was gentle but strong, honest but kind, and she took charge of a situation that could have been chaotic and devastating. Over the next several hours, while Sarah was in labor, the three of us women that Michael had deceived and manipulated sat in that hospital waiting room and shared our stories. We cried together, we got angry together, and most importantly, we supported each other through the hardest night any of us had ever experienced. Sarah's daughter, little Grace, was born healthy at 3:47 a.m. on Sunday morning. And when the nurse asked if Sarah wanted to call the baby's father, Sarah looked at Jessica and me and said, "No, I think this little girl is better off without him." Sandra Morrison arrived from Indianapolis the next morning with her lawyer and divorce papers. The three women who had been funding Michael's lies met in Sarah's hospital room and made a pact. We were going to make sure he faced consequences for what he'd done, and we were going to support each other through the legal mess that was sure to follow. But most importantly, we were going to move forward with our lives. It took 6 months to sort out all the legal complications. Michael, whose real name was indeed Matthew Richard Morrison, was arrested on charges of bigamy, identity theft, and multiple counts of obtaining money under false pretenses. He was also extradited to Indiana to face the outstanding child support warrants. Jessica filed for an annulment of their fake marriage and got full custody of Emily. The house that I had helped purchase was sold, and Jessica used her portion of the proceeds to put a down payment on a small apartment just 10 minutes from mine. She went back to work at Ashley's boutique, and Ashley, who had never stopped being a loyal friend, welcomed her back with open arms and even gave her a promotion to store manager. Sarah decided to stay in Chicago, and she and Jessica developed an unexpected friendship. They help each other with childcare, and little Grace and Emily have become like sisters. Sandra went back to Indianapolis, but we all stay in touch. She sent Jessica a beautiful baby gift when Sarah had Grace, and she visits Chicago a few times a year. As for me, well, I learned something important about the difference between helping someone and enabling someone. I learned that love sometimes means letting people face the consequences of their choices, even when it breaks your heart. But most importantly, I got my daughter back. The real Jessica, not the woman who had been molded and manipulated by a man who saw her as nothing more than a source of income. 6 months after that confrontation at Denny's, Jessica and Emily moved into their new apartment. Jessica invited me over for dinner to celebrate, and as we sat around her small kitchen table, a table she had bought and paid for herself, she took my hand and said something I'll never forget. "Mom, I want you to know that you saved my life. You saved Emily's life. I don't know where we would have ended up if you hadn't been brave enough to fight for us when I couldn't fight for myself." Today, Jessica is thriving. She's dating a kind man named David, who works as a teacher and who treats Emily like she's his own daughter. Emily is excelling in school and has never asked about Michael. Jessica has been promoted again at the boutique and is considering opening her own store in a few years. And me? I'm still cleaning houses, but now it's by choice, not out of desperation. I have money in my savings account for the first time in years. I see my daughter and granddaughter several times a week, not because they need my financial help, but because they want my company. I learned that being a mother doesn't mean sacrificing yourself completely for your children. It means loving them enough to let them grow into the people they're meant to be, even when that growth is painful. Sometimes, the greatest act of love is refusing to enable someone's destruction, even when they hate you for it. And sometimes, just sometimes, standing up for yourself and demanding respect is exactly what your family needs to heal. If this story touched your heart, please share it with someone who might need to hear this message. Subscribe to the channel for more real stories of overcoming and resilience. And remember, it's never too late to demand the respect you deserve, even from the people you love most. Your worth isn't determined by what you can provide for others. Your value comes from who you are, not what you give. And sometimes the best gift you can give your family is showing them what self-respect looks like.